Hello, my name is Joseph Hirschetta. I have a MS in pharmaceutics from the University of Washington, Seattle, and the title of my presentation is called Research Pros and Cons, Long-Term Commitment, Advocacy, and Community Investment. This is specifically related to American Indian communities. Chante washte nape chuiziapelo, tate kichinaji amachiapelo. Jesus iracheta tunkashla waye, na eladio duran unchiwaye. Tata huriate kanani echeri simarane, arwa parani, atiksi ka hisesi ama shaka, ini huriatekwa himbo. I pure pacheska ka huchete tatecha, arikwa hesinti, Maria ka Manuele. I aringa singa tanashwan, ka hi ishu haras kanek sipek ingon. What I just engaged in was something called indigenous accountability or indigenous relationality or relational accountability. And this increasingly needs to be done in research settings where community or other indigenous researchers are involved. This not only places myself in relation to my ancestors and my relatives, but also places me in a relational aspect to the audience that I'm speaking to. I basically said that I'm glad to meet you. I'm glad to be here on this day, and I told either my grandparents' names or my parents' names so that people know, or at least have the potential to know who I'm related to and if I am related to them at all. Here's a little bit more relational accountability. My name is Joseph Hirschetta. My name is not French or Spanish. Hirschetta is a name from the Basque people, the Euskadi language. It's a people that reside between France and Spain in the Pyrenees Mountains. I myself am indigenous from Mexico. The Purepecha, also called Tarascan, are from west central Mexico, and their name means we like to visit. And I'm also from the Raramuri tribe, or what is known as the Tarahumara, from Chihuahua, which is just south of New Mexico, and they are also known as the ones that run. So we're here to discuss whether or not research is good or bad for American Indian communities, and is American Indian participation in research something that individual community members would want to do. And here in this slide, I'm going to talk about how research is only as good as the question asked, the people involved, the length of commitment, and the relationship with the community and the community's engagement or commitment to um, including themselves in the um, intervention or application of the research. As we know, tuberculosis used to be very high among American Indians. Um, this was especially true after European colonization, but there's evidence that tuberculosis existed before that in the Americas, but it became considerably worse because of sequestration on reservations and the high density and poverty within those reservations. As you can see here from this paper on Cheyenne River, South Dakota, between 1878 and 1885, the death rate per 1,000 deaths for TB was quite high. It's almost half of all the deaths on the reservation. Previously, most of these individuals were taken to sanitariums and housed separately. That caused quite a bit of family um, disjunction and as well as escape from sanitariums and increasing distress for the medical establishment. What happened was it took some dedicated professionals to try to improve this problem through ambulatory care, and this was enhanced by chemotherapeutics like isoniazid, and was further enhanced by the um, prioritization of cultural sensitivity to disseminate information among community members so that they would dispel myths and dispel distrust and increase the ability for individuals to educate their own community and family members. One of the people who was part of this increase or prioritization of cultural sensitivity for the betterment of TB care was named Loreline Means um, from the Aberdeen Area Health Board. She herself is a Lakota member. Here you have an article that talks about autism research, and this picture is very telling about research. Um, there are many questions, there are many conditions, and each researcher is looking for tracks or telltale hints that will lead them to the information that is going to correct the condition. And everybody's looking at a different book, and everybody is following a different trail in different directions, and it makes the research process somewhat complicated. And that is very true for autism. Although autism was first described in 1927, it didn't seem to make much headway between 1927 and the mid 1980s. There was lots of wrong-headed thinking about what caused autism, a lot of victim blaming the mother. And it wasn't until 1989 through 1994 where the parents of autistic children really took up the initiative on their own to not only record information about their children, but to share that information with handpicked representatives from the research community and solicited money from private foundations to actually get the research done. And since that has happened, there's been quite a big shift in not only the research prioritization, but the funding amounts and the overall picture or description of autism and autism spectrum disorders. For something closer to home, in the Pine Ridge Reservation for Oglala Lakota, it was noticed by everyday people that there was quite a few miscarriages and a few um, uh, births with um, disabilities. And it took an organization like Women of All Red Nations to collect the information from the families, get the different well sources of water tested, and then contact researchers to help them analyze and design studies that would be respected by the local IHS facility. And this activity actually resulted in um, something now called the Mini-Uchoni Pipeline, which pipes water all the way from the Missouri River all the way to the western part of South Dakota to the Pine Ridge Reservation, and is an ongoing project to cover almost all of the reservation so that people will have clean drinking water rather than relying on wells that are naturally contaminated with uranium and arsenic. So the point of these stories is that research improves the quality of life if uh, researchers have a long-term commitment to solving the riddle or the puzzle, um, that they are advocates for their communities that they're working for, that the community is an advocate for itself, and that the community has a investment in the research, not only uh, expecting a solution, but asking the questions and continuing to have a relationship with the researchers or funding agencies. Some of the problems that make research um, difficult, or at least the return of benefit difficult in tribal communities, is that there are these divides between the tribe and the communities outside the tribe. So, in general, federal policy doesn't see much of a separation between themselves and the tribes. The idea is that we're all American citizens, and federal policies raise all boats. Uh, in general, just from a normal bell curve, um, for funding and for inquiry, they try to tailor their policies where they make sure that they're um, serving as many people as possible. And sometimes the people who are in the tails of the distribution, like American Indians, go unserviced. Also, once findings come from these research studies, um, they're based on a national average, and since most of the country is non-Indian, um, these recommendations might not be applicable for tribal communities on any number of criteria. Conversely, states where American Indians reside often see an abundance of separateness. Um, Here in South Dakota, for example, South Dakota did not want to participate in the Affordable Care Act and resisted it for almost a year. Once they did participate, um, including Medicaid expansion to make it more amenable, or it will cover more people, um, especially American Indian tribes, the state didn't want to do that because they were basically putting the burden on the federal government to take care of their American Indian population. They didn't feel that that was their responsibility. Secondly, in terms of preventative measures such as healthcare curricula in schools, the standards are um, inconsistently applied, and uh, funding isn't always available for healthcare curricula tailored to American Indian communities. Another kind of bugaboo is that several times um, legislation has been passed in South Dakota um, for, let's see, cultural tolerance. Um, that Lakota language and cultural will be taught in all state schools. Um, and that's been a political football that's been tossed back and forth. And currently, the legislation has been rescinded. But the biggest problem, the biggest divide between tribal communities and other communities is this lack of institutional memory. Prior to this current era of evidence based everything, evidence based research, evidence based practice, evidence based policy and funding, um, most of these decisions were made by um, professionals. So you'd have a staff of healthcare professionals that would, over time, service their communities and look at the prevalences or incidences of certain conditions in their communities and handle things accordingly. Um, that takes education, it takes intuition, and it takes caring for your community. And that didn't exist and doesn't exist in many American Indian communities, where a group of educated professionals can take anecdote and turn it into educational guesses, um, and then turn those educated guesses into hypotheses. and then go from there to solve more difficult health conditions. So I'm suggesting that to make sure that research um, benefits communities in the long term, that we create systems and policies to create durable institutional memory for American Indian communities. First, I would start with the embodied institutional memory of training career community professionals and making um, the environment, housing environment, other environmental factors in tribal communities so that they would not leave. Um, Increasing the digital and durable record side to institutional memory, meaning we have to create systems where we protect paper and digital records. And then moving on to foundational and grants or sustainability portions of institutional memory, uh, creating institutions where they are not so reliant on soft money, um, finding a way to take either tribal, state, or federal contributions dedicated specifically towards um, a longer term research entity. And then lastly, creating policies and creating plans over the long term that will stay in place even under uh, staff changes. I call it here structured ethos or structured uh, institutional memory, so that basically the idea and philosophy about how to conduct research and how to operationalize research is understood over a long period of time in tribal communities. Once that happens, you can move over here to the right diagram where institutional memory really starts to work to improve health in the community. You would start out by identifying needs, gathering data, analyzing the data and producing the information, disseminating that information, and then cycle back to identifying needs, if not all um, conditions or aspects of a condition have been improved. So many tribal communities, because of distrust and because of um, having many sort of relationships and agreements with outside entities go sour, would prefer to opt out of research. So, can they opt out of research? In my opinion, the answer is no. The reason, at least particularly for genomic research, um, is that we have very many uh, people from our communities in the military. And in the military, they do research. They do research on the soldiers, and they take DNA. Um, they take DNA for identification purposes, but that doesn't mean that research isn't being done with that DNA. At the very basic level, DNA research has to occur for quality control purposes to make sure that what you're measuring is something that you're really measuring. Is the identity that you're uh, trying to find with a person that's gone missing or has been returned deceased is the real person that you found. And there's all kinds of ways that quality control measures happen with DNA. Another area is criminal forensics. There's at least 6 states now that require you to submit a DNA sample regardless of your guilt. And uh, for federal crimes, it's mandatory to submit a DNA sample. And most tribal communities are under federal jurisdiction, and most um, of our members who go to prison are in federal prisons. And again, um, some research is done, uh, but even at a minimum level, there has to be a lot of quality control, and that reveals information that perhaps tribal communities do not want known. There is also the native people who are not recognized or only state recognized or have moved to urban areas and have discontinued their enrollment across the generations. And of course, there's lots of Mexican Americans who share quite a bit of DNA with American Indians. So it's already going on in universities and hospitals across the country where these populations go for medical services. There's also the issue around perinatal testing. Here you see them collecting blood spots from the heel of the baby. These blood spots are used for health monitoring of the children to make sure that they're not at risk for um, any disability like phenylketonuria (PKU), which would, if not caught early, might lead to mental retardation. And there's other um, genetic screening that goes along with that. But they take quite a few blood spots and they save them, and um, they can use them for DNA research. Um, they cut the little circles out. They're all de-identified. The only thing that's put on there is the date, the location, and the ethnicity of the child. And the tribe doesn't have any jurisdiction, um, and the parents need not be consented because a lot of times these are public health um, monitoring exercises, which is presumably for the good of everyone. But they also do secondary analyses on these blood spots. There's only two states that I'm aware of that have banned that use, Minnesota and Indiana. But for the most part across the country, this is quite legitimate use of these blood spots. Another reason why American Indian communities cannot opt out of this kind of research is because in the private sector, there's quite a large market for genetic testing. Um, Not all of research comes from federally funded or um, charitably funded organizations. Some of them are out there as a business, and this is increasingly becoming that way. Um, and then if you go to ancestry testing, these companies like 23andMe and FamilyTree.com and Ancestry.com, folks are not only looking for their ethnic origins, but these companies are taking the same information and moving into the clinical and health research related areas. So, given all of this, the federal government finds themselves in a very um, tenuous position. Um, the amount of research that is happening and the pace of science and technology is happening so quickly that many of these legal issues and ethical issues cannot be um, not be investigated thoroughly. So basically, any regulation is being far outpaced by the science. In this example, they're talking more about digital information, like with Uber or drone technology or Google's driverless cars. But the same holds true in with genetic, epigenetic, metabolomic, and proteomic, and all the different omics that have to do with health-related research. And if the federal government is having trouble keeping up you can imagine how far behind tribal governments are on these issues, um, in terms of their understanding and then trying to regulate or negotiate with the federal government their own um, interest in uh, genetic and other types of research. So I'm not against research. I think there's quite a few good things about research in terms of tribal communities. Research helps us answer the great need for health solutions in our communities. It can increase the knowledge about baseline measures in our communities because most of the baseline measures are done in non-native or white communities. Um, Also, identification of rare and orphan conditions is something that doesn't often happen in our communities. And those are very population specific, and the money behind research can help fast track um, the identification and possible solutions for those conditions. The current moonshot initiatives of precision medicine and uh, cancer um, genetics will provide tons of money to American Indian communities, and possible uses of that money would to be to build capacity and capabilities not only in personnel but in infrastructure and equipment. Science is always improved by different cultures and different sets of eyes on similar or the same research inquiry or questions. Also, the recognition of different health contexts, which one could argue that if you're not from the community, you don't entirely understand um, the health context where these questions are being posed. It can help Native communities dispel myths in bad science and support truths or anecdotes from us. Something that just came across this year is Arizona State University basically debunked the idea that American Indians were somehow more predisposed to alcoholism than other ethnicities. So we need more of that. And then um, there's a lot of talk about transdisciplinarity in research, and Obama administration and NIH have said that that needs to happen, especially with regard to genome and environmental interactions. But there doesn't seem to be much money behind um, that idea. It seems to be a lot of lip service at the moment, but um, because American Indians are in this unique position where they are um, subject to a lot of environmental differences and political differences from outside um, communities, they can really push for real transdisciplinary research and hopefully use that funding um, to fill in these gaps of information of why there are health disparities that are not related to genes. And then lastly, we have to look at the long game. Currently, data is king. You can argue that data always was king, especially in the court system and improving need for funding and also for tracking differences in generational health profiles. So we have to look at this in the long term. We cannot determine whether or not a condition is new or old or pre-existing to European colonization if we don't start collecting information that spans a wide amount of time and a wide group of people. Um, in terms of the legal, there's always a possibility of using research information compiled together, these big uh, interrelated data sets, to show any number of issues. One would be breakage patterns in cases of radiation poisoning, possible environmental forensics using different microbiome profiles in local waterways, um, and looking possibly at trying to uh, prove land claims based on current peoples as compared to peoples buried nearby. So there's other reasons to store and use genetic information other than just health related ones. The cons are several. I don't think they're insurmountable. It just takes a level of advocacy. Um, so tribes are politically sovereign. They're not an ethnic minority. They're not sharing one pie divided. They have their own stake in the game. They have their own pie. They have their own claim on their own data. But unfortunately, many researchers and the federal government either don't understand sovereignty or have a lack of respect for sovereignty and the certain moratoria towards research that exists in certain American Indian communities. Also, the timelines don't match. The timelines for research grants on the federal level do not match the slower timelines in tribal councils and communities. There's also extreme lack of belief that there's a possibility of difference either genetically or, um, like I said, in health contexts, um, especially where there's a political border between tribal groups and then the adjacent communities of the state they reside in. Also, in this country, individual property and intellectual property is prioritized over communal property, and that's shown very clearly most recently in the auctions of opium masks in France. There was no way for the tribe to claim that as their own because they could not identify a single owner. Um, there's also this issue of funding mechanisms. There's many departments at the federal level, and they all have their little niches for doing things or increasing research or intervention. And tribes don't have the wherewithal to go to each department and make separate applications for business, education, health research, all kinds of different things. So it'd be better if the federal government created something that was more comprehensive, since there is so much money for genomic and other omic research. If they can just kind of put everything in one pot, and that's not unheard of. I mean, in all genomic research, they put aside 5% for ethical, legal, social issues to be studied at the same time as genetic information. Um, so they did that at a federal level across the country. They can and should make an exception for tribal communities to include um, other types of research around genetic uh, health research, um, like increasing capacity at the K through 12 level, um, making special exemptions for data sharing, all kinds of things. Um, there's another con is that there's a lack of advocates and professionals for tribal communities. There are some, and there are hardly any from tribal communities. So we have to increase advocates and professionals, both non and native. And then because of the funding stream, there's a lack of control over data use. The tribe, many tribes feel that they own the data, but the federal government begs to differ on that point. And then lastly, the image. Um, there's not very many ways um, to do anything about misinformation or information based on the data generated to somehow stigmatize tribal communities. And then small populations of American Indian communities mean that there's less of a market share, so less of a reason for somebody or a company to try to come up with a solution or a therapy or a pharmaceutic. Um, there's just not enough money in it, and because they're a small population, they're easily identifiable by zip code. And American Indians have something called um, long runs of homozygosity. So, and also strong linkage disequilibrium patterns that make them pretty identifiable without having to know very much information about the population that's under study. There's a lack of healthcare diversity. Most tribal communities only have the Indian Health Service. They can't go to other places, and so to implement uh, the findings from research, um, it's better to have choice. It's better to have a group of healthcare professionals that have varied interests and maybe aren't so busy, and they can look up information that is specific to tribal people, um, and more willing to service tribal people. There's a lack of infrastructure. A lot of times things are called nonprofits, but there is resources at nonprofits. There's jobs, there's buildings, there's equipment, there's training, there's all of these things that make up a nonprofit would be better if they existed in tribal communities, not 100 to 1,000 miles away someplace else, um, basically employing non-natives and training non-natives. So we need to somehow uh, capture, along with the research and the data, a way to house these institutes or facilities in tribal communities so we get more capacity generation. And then, as I alluded to earlier in the talk, there's just too much reliance on soft money. There has to be either a business solution or a fundraising solution or some other kind of way to generate money that's more reliable to um, keep these projects going. Because if you're at the mercy of soft money or grant money, um, you're going to have lots of gaps in employment, lots of gaps in research projects, and ultimately gaps in intervention and application. So that's my talk. Thank you for bearing with me. This is an animation from the series on PBS called The Secret of Life. It's a 5-hour series. You can go to YouTube and see a 30-minute trailer um, for the 5-hour series. And this is basically the DNA dividing and replicating itself before the cell divides. Thank you.